Introduction. On the northeast coast of the United States, the land, shaped like a giant's arm, extends out into the Atlantic Ocean. The land is called Cape Cod, and besides being where the Pilgrims landed, it is the home of Chesterton, the good-natured weasel. Chesterton's not your typical weasel. He looks like other weasels, with his rust-colored coat, deep dark brown eyes, and white bib, but he behaves differently. Weasels have a reputation for being mean, cunning, and vicious fighters. Chesterton is his own weasel. He cares about other creatures, especially those that seem to be disappearing, what the humans call threatened or endangered. 13-year-old Dylan Winchester also lives on Cape Cod. Dylan cares deeply about animals. He would often rather be around animals than kids at school or family members or neighbors. Dylan has autism, and sometimes he behaves in ways that are puzzling for people around him, especially other kids. Wild Moon is a nature mystery about animals and people living together. Something strange happened on the first autumn full moon on the shores of Cape Cod Bay. It was the same night that Dylan and his mom were camping. Dylan's special gift, his unique way to connect with animals, allows him to piece together a strange puzzle, a nature mystery like no other. Prologue. Chesterton the Weasel and a couple of his cousins have found shelter from the storm underneath the old gristmill in the village of Sandwich, the oldest town on Cape Cod. An ever-curious, good-natured weasel, Chesterton simply does not behave like the rest of his family. He has a unique, caring approach to cohabiting with those with whom he shares the planet, whether they be the furry kind or humankind. He is his own animal. As the storm raged and the animals chattered, an incredible idea took flight. Dylan Winchester is 13. He has a unique way with animals, wild animals, a connection and sensitivity that allow him to see the world as they see it. Something very strange happened on the first autumn full moon on the shores of Cape Cod Bay. It was the same night that Dylan and his mom were camping. Dylan's love of animals and his special ability allow him to see the world as animals see it and enable him to piece together a strange puzzle and create a historic plan of action to help wild animals survive. Part 1. The Animals. As the night of the full moon got closer, Chesterton paced more and more around his den. Chapter 1. Under the Gristmill. Thunder and the loud crack of lightning didn't stop Chesterton the Weasel from feasting on a plump mouse. The mouse had been scrounging dried corn kernels from cracks in the gristmill floor. Chesterton's two cousins, Otter and Mink, were there too. Otter let out a gentle burp as he swallowed his last herring. Mink was saving the bullfrog he'd pulled from the pond to have a snack later on. The three were hanging out under the old gristmill waiting for the storm to pass, and although they were cousins, their habitats were very different. Mink and Otter were water creatures. Chesterton lived in a den in the forest. When Chesterton had licked his paws clean, he asked, "Are you bothered about the animals that are disappearing?" Like who? Asked Otter. Black Racer Snake, for one, replied Chesterton. When was the last time you saw Black Racer? I bet you can't remember. Although Black Racer didn't live at the water's edge like Mink and Otter, he would often hunt for food along the creek. Mink joined in. Well, what about Box Turtle? We haven't seen him since the humans built the house where the farm used to be. Remember the farmer's son? He set metal traps for us in the woods and the meadow. Come to think of it, I haven't seen Wood Turtle since the swans left the creek. So what's the big deal, Chesterton? Why should we care? Said Otter, who was rolling over, twisting like a dog, scratching its back. We don't need any of them. Just don't tell me the herring are going to disappear. That's when I'll get upset. Chesterton hopped to the edge of the grist mill, and he looked up at the clearing sky. He raised himself up so he was standing at his full 11¼ inches, and said, Otter, woodcock has been gone forever. We are losing our habitats, our places to live and eat and raise our families. We're all going to be what the humans call endangered or threatened. We could even become extinct, like the dinosaurs. We need to do something. Something like what? Asked Otter. Well, what about getting all the animals together? Figure out what's going on. Talk about what's happening. Otter rolled over onto his stomach. That would be totally impossible, Chesterton. Get everyone together? It'll never happen. Nobody talks to one another. Like, which one of us is going to talk to Coyote, Chesterton? Not me. Chesterton looked Otter in the eye. We need to try, Otter. Don't you get it? If some of our habitats are being destroyed, it won't be long before they're all destroyed. Coyote is mean and dangerous, Otter protested. I know Coyote is dangerous. I also know he's very smart. He gets it. I'm not afraid to ask Coyote to come to a meeting. Skunk had wandered into the gathering. He could sense that Chesterton was frustrated with Otter. What's happening? He asked. I think we need to get all the animals together and find out why some of us are disappearing, repeated Chesterton. Otter thinks it's a dumb idea. Sounds good to me, said Skunk. I can talk to Possum and Raccoon, and I can get to Squirrel and Chipmunk and Rabbit and Fox too. Mink finally spoke up. Otter and I will talk to Box Turtle and Muskrat. Won't we, Otter? Otter gave Mink a look. Whatever. We really need to get Deer involved to spread the word, Chesterton urged as he watched two kids approaching to fish the pond behind the gristmill. It's not going to be easy to cover all the fields and woodlands along the shores of Cape Cod. We need Deer's help. Chesterton thought, Deer, Coyote, Great Blue Heron. Those should be the first to be invited. Let's try and bring everyone together on the night of the next full moon, he suggested. Great idea. Let's go for it, Skunk said as he rambled over to Mink. I'd like to meet some of these characters who are afraid of the dark and only come out in the daytime. Mink laughed at Skunk's humor. They agreed that the best place to meet would be at the edge of the large meadow, where the creek starts to widen near the mouth of Old Harbor. Chapter 2. It's Getting Serious. Heading back to his den, Chesterton found Great Blue Heron perched on the dead willow tree by the pond. It was one of Heron's favorite fishing spots. Heron was aware that Chesterton was nearby, but he continued to stare at the shallow water. Chesterton waited to speak. Heron stood like a statue, not moving a muscle, until some Canada geese landed near the shore and frightened all the fish. How's the fishing, Heron? I was doing fine until the geese came crashing in. I need to ask you a favor, Heron. Chesterton and Heron had always been cordial. They had no reason to give one another any trouble. So what's up? Chesterton told Heron about the meeting with all the animals. Heron didn't respond. And so Chesterton continued. Would you talk to Osprey about the meeting? Heron snapped his long neck around and looked down at Chesterton with his sharp beak about 2 inches from Chesterton's nose. What? You want me to... You know I never talk to Osprey. Osprey steals my fish, Chesterton. You can't be serious. I know, Heron. It sounds ridiculous, but we all need to try. It's important. Yes, this is serious. Heron looked back at the water, pulled his neck in, and then, crouching slightly, pushed himself into flight. Chesterton started off towards his den, feeling a little frustrated until he heard Heron mumble as he flew by. I'll think about it. Chapter 3. Coyote. When Chesterton finally caught up with Coyote, he found him looking through a fence into the backyard in one of the human neighborhoods. He was staring at a small dog sitting on a back porch by a large glass door. The lights and the TV were on. It was starting to get dark. Coyote looked like a stone statue with long hair. He didn't move. Chesterton knew the coyote was aware that he was there. The dog barked again, and a young girl slid the door open. Well, Amber, have you decided it's supper time? Are you hungry? She asked as she picked up her pet. Amber, you're shaking. The dog repeatedly licked the little girl's neck. Are you okay? Is that awful coyote out there again? Coyote gave Chesterton a "So what's up?" look. He stared with his big green eyes, waiting for Chesterton to say something. Coyote, some of the animals have been talking about... I know. I heard. You want to have a meeting to talk about why we're losing our habitat. Well, yeah, we do. Are you coming? No, I'm not. Why would I? Other than you, I have no enemies or creatures stealing my food. I'm safe, and I always will be. I am, in case you are not aware, king of the forest here on Cape Cod. You are the only one who can give me any grief. Chesterton was pleased to hear Coyote admit that weasels could be a challenge. Coyote could handle himself with any creature, but he had a certain respect for weasels. Even though they were one of the smallest creatures in the forest, they were always quick and alert and able to defend themselves. Coyote, we're all losing our habitats. Not all at once, but sooner or later, we will all be threatened or endangered, or maybe even become extinct. Not me, Chesterton. I'm fine. I don't need your meeting. Chesterton hopped up a little closer to Coyote. He stood tall. Well, as tall as he could. Coyote, when was the last time you tasted a rabbit? I don't know. It's been a while. What difference does it make? Did you just wake up one morning and decide to change your diet and get your energy somewhere else? No, not really. Cottontails were getting impossible to find, so Chesterton interrupted. So you decided to go after little dogs penned up in the humans' backyards. Are you really fine, Coyote? Chesterton waited for just a few seconds. He turned to hop away and said, I think you'd better plan on coming to the meeting, Coyote. I'll see you there. Chapter 4. Deer Jumps In. Chesterton didn't waste any time getting to the meadow by the edge of the forest to find Deer. Deer's ears and tail were pointed high as she watched Chesterton approach. Her fawn darted into the brush, but Deer waited. What brings you to the meadow, Chesterton? We need your help. There are more and more of us losing our habitats, and a few of us are trying to get a meeting of all the wild creatures. You're such a fast runner. We need you to help spread the word. I'm not losing my habitat as much as others. I can actually live on most of the things the humans plant around their homes and grow in their gardens. With more streets and cars, however, it's dangerous for us to move about at night, and their dogs make us nervous, but we're faster and we can jump fences. As Fawn cautiously returned to his mother's side, Deer continued, We can help spread the word about your meeting. As Fawn cautiously returned to his mother's side, Deer continued, We can help. We can spread the word about your meeting. Chapter 5. What If? All along Cape Cod Bay, from Plymouth to Provincetown, wild animals were busy spreading the word about the moonlight meeting. There were daytime conversations and conversations under the stars at night, along the edge of the marsh and deep in the woods, along roadsides and in the trees. Shorebirds talked to turtles, and voles cautiously listened to foxes. Animals who feared and naturally avoided one another were actually talking and listening to each other. Days passed, and each night the moon became larger and rounder. Chesterton paced more and more around his den. What if no one shows up? What if my cousins Mink and Otter and Skunk are the only ones that come to the meeting? What if Shark decides to leave the bay and swim into the harbor? What if there's fighting? If Coyote comes, will he behave? What if Fox comes and he hasn't eaten for a couple of days? One attack could cause chaos. If something bad happened, the animals would never get together again. Chapter 6. Big Moon, Big Night. On the night of the full moon, Chesterton went to the creek to see Otter and Mink. The full moon reflected in Otter's dark eyes. Chesterton told his cousins that he'd never been so nervous. Bringing everyone together like this could really be a bad idea. I hope you'll forgive me if this doesn't work, he mumbled. Otter started to speak, but he quickly ducked underwater when Great Blue Heron's huge shadow suddenly blocked the moonlight. Heron glided past and landed in a tree. Several bats flushed, but circled back to their branches. In the bright moonlight, Chesterton could see many silhouettes. The cottontails were there. Crow announced his presence. Owl chimed in with a few hoots. Deer's eyes seemed bigger in the moonlight. Raccoon trundled in and scrunched down next to Skunk. Even terns and gulls flew in, then geese. Crow announced his presence again. A pair of swans honked their greeting. Daytime creatures and nighttime creatures were arriving. Chesterton couldn't see them, but he could hear a pair of osprey gently screeching to each other. They all heard the distinctive howl of Coyote announcing his arrival. So what were you saying, Otter asked Chesterton. Well, I was saying that I wasn't sure that anyone would show up, but that's not the case, is it, Otter? This is awesome. All of us wild ones and no humans to worry about. After a large cloud passed over the moon, all of Cape Cod Bay was flooded in moonlight. It was an incredible scene, with so many animals gathered together in the trees and on the marsh and the meadow and in the creek. Owl started the meeting. Thank you all for coming to this urgent first-time event. I'm sure that a gathering like this has never happened before. We have creatures from all over Cape Cod, from Plymouth to Provincetown, and from so many different habitats. Some of us live in the upland forest, and some at the creek and the shoreline. Some live in dens and others in nests. Some of us lay eggs, and some of us have pups. We are all different in many ways, yet we all live in the neighborhood called Cape Cod. Owl paused and then loudly proclaimed, "We need to congratulate one another for being here together." The animals responded enthusiastically. There was a lot of honking, squawking, squeaking, and howling. There was barking, screeching, yelping, growling, and as often happens when animals get excited, there was a lot of pooping happening as well. Chapter 7. The Human Menace. Chesterton thanked Owl and then invited everyone to come in close enough to be able to hear. We have all come together because there's something very scary going on, and sooner or later it will affect each of us. We are all losing our habitats. Cottontail interrupted. It's true. It's happening to us. Every year we're losing our food plants, our shelter, our greenbriers. We have no place to hide from coyote, hawk, and fox. Hawk didn't say anything, but Fox jumped into the conversation and admitted, "It's true." Blue Jay chattered, "It's humans' fault. They're to blame." Owl spoke, "Humans need more space to build their homes, streets, schools, stores, parks, and ball fields. When they build more neighborhoods, it forces us out of our natural neighborhoods. We have another problem, too. Our weather is changing. Summer days are getting hotter, and the ocean is flooding the marsh more. The storms are more severe in summer and winter. I don't understand what it's all about, but I know that some of the fish we used to eat are not around anymore." Gull grumbled. "It seems like when our weather changes, our food changes. Sometimes the clams and the mussels I catch in the creek or the harbor don't smell or taste the same as they used to." Hawk squawked, "I used to eat plover, but they're almost all gone." The plovers exchanged a quick glance at one another and slouched lower into the marsh grass. Chapter 8. Little Vole Thinks Big. The animals shared their stories. Pheasant said, "My cousin Heath Hen is gone forever. The whole family is extinct. I will never see any of them again." There were a few arguments. Owl got upset with Coyote, and Goose hissed at Fox several times. It seemed that everyone agreed that things were changing, not just for the animals, but for humans too. Vole whispered something to Cottontail, and Cottontail passed it on to Deer, who announced, "Vole says we need to have a conversation with the humans, not just talk amongst ourselves." Otter shouted, "That's impossible. It was hard enough to get us all together. There's no way we're going to get the humans involved." Owl's feathers puffed. He fumed. "If this meeting is the only one we have and nothing changes, we are all in big trouble. This has to be the beginning of how we figure if we and the humans can live side by side on this planet." The animals continued their lively discussions, but as the moon sank lower in the west, they began to head back to their nests, their dens, warrens, and fields. Owl thought about how Vole, the smallest creature at the meeting, was the one to have the biggest idea. The animals had no idea that a strange connection with humans may be about to happen. Part 2. The Humans. Dylan loved campfires, the smell of sizzling bacon, pancakes with butter and maple syrup. But mostly, he loved animals. Chapter 9. Dylan Winchester. Dylan Winchester and his mom lived in a neighborhood several miles from the creek, far enough away that it was a treat to go there. His mom was a biology teacher at the high school. Dylan's middle school was close by. They both loved animals, but Dylan's mom knew that he had a special way of connecting with them, whether it was wild turkeys or squirrels in the woods, the neighbors' horses or other pets. They seemed to have no fear of Dylan. Animals, even wild animals, didn't automatically run away from him as they did with other humans. Dylan and animals just seemed to accept and understand one another. In the summer between his first and second grades, doctors told Dylan's mom that he was autistic. They told her that autism was not an illness or a disease, but that Dylan's brain worked differently than most people. They said Dylan had an excellent memory and an exceptional ability to remember details. In school, his mom said, he would join in conversations about things he liked, but if it wasn't interesting, he'd get restless. He'd stop paying attention, and his mind would wander to something interesting to him. He'll read about animals forever and remember details about them. But reading about sports or another country or history was boring, she said to his doctor. She said if his friends were talking about something else, like their favorite games, Dylan would often interrupt and try to change the conversation to talk about animals. Dylan, she said, does well, and he's happy when things go along as expected, but when his routine changes, he gets anxious. If I change his breakfast cereal, or am a minute late to pick him up at school, or if I have to change our normal drive home for any reason, he can get angry and have an outburst or a tantrum. At home, Dylan could spend hours at the window watching birds and other creatures. His favorite place was by the big picture window that looked out on the backyard and the fire pit and the woods. His mom had hung bird feeders for woodpeckers just inches from the window. She attached other feeders to the outside of the window. He loved being so close. He could hear the birds chirping at the feeders even though the windows and the doors were closed. Dylan was very sensitive to sounds. The sudden screech of a blue jay could sound like a fire siren to Dylan. There were pictures in his bedroom of him feeding the birds and the chipmunks at the picnic table in the pine grove by the garage. The chipmunks would scurry around his feet, and eats the sunflower seeds he dropped for them. The nuthatches and the chickadees would fly in, grab a seed, and then disappear into the shrubs and the trees. If Dylan's movement startled the birds, they might fly away, but only for a moment. Wild creatures seemed to know that Dylan was not going to harm them. The walls in Dylan's room were covered with animal pictures from around the world. There were polar bears, owls, kangaroos, koala bears, snakes, turtles, and horses. There were carved and plastic crows, hawks, and cardinals hanging from the ceiling. Anyone who visited Dylan's room would see in a second that he loved animals, all animals. He not only loved them, but he also loved to learn about them. He learned about their habits, where they lived, what they eat, and how many babies in their litters. Sometimes he would know how long they stayed with their mothers before going out into the world on their own. Dylan loved sharing animal facts with his mom and anyone who would listen. In class one day, the teacher was talking about an island in Maine where there were hundreds of puffins. Dylan interrupted and said, "Puffins only lay one egg. They return to the same rocky island where they were hatched to raise their chick. They can beat their wings over 400 times a minute. They can hold over a dozen fish in their beak at the same time." On the morning his mom was packing for their moonlight campout, she said, "I wonder if the raccoon pups we saw in the spring have left their den." Dylan responded immediately. Their babies are kits or cubs. They usually stay with their mother until late fall, and when the mother will show them dens and places to feed. If it's cold, they might stay together for the whole winter. He added, "I think they'll be gone. The coyotes, great horned owls, and the fishers will be looking for the kits, but some will be killed by cars." He changed the subject and said, "Are we going to have bacon and pancakes when we camp?" Dylan's mom smiled as she packed chocolate bars and marshmallows and graham crackers in the picnic box. "Of course," she said, "we're having bacon and pancakes and maple syrup. It wouldn't be a camping trip without them, would it?" Chapter 10. The Strangest Night. Dylan and his mom loved to camp. He always slept with his head closest to the tent door so he could see the last coals of the evening fire burn down. They loved to hike through the moonlight woods in the early morning darkness to catch the sunrise. Sitting by their fire on the night of the full moon, they could not believe the birds. Most birds sleep at night, but tonight there were birds everywhere, darting through the moonlit sky. There were also strange wild animal sounds in the distance. "Coyote!" exclaimed Dylan. His mom nodded and said, "I think you're right. Listen, I don't ever remember hearing crows at night. Do you?" As Dylan thought about her question, he rocked slowly, gently, something he often did when he wasn't concentrating or if he was trying to calm himself. However, he continued to keep his eyes fixed on the fire. "We've camped here many times, Dylan, but I don't ever remember hearing so many animals and wild creatures, do you?" Dylan didn't answer. He sat staring at the fire. "You're the animal expert, Dylan. What's going on? Maybe there's a fire somewhere, but we haven't smelled anything burning. When we've camped here before, we might have heard a coyote or a screech owl, but never has there been so much commotion." As Dylan's mom unzipped the door for their tent, she said, "Well, the birds will be chirping and telling us it's time to get up before we know it. Let's try and get some sleep, shall we?" Dylan poked the campfire with a stick. He carefully separated the burning logs before crawling into his tent. And with all the night noises, it took him forever to fall asleep. He wondered as he pulled his earphones on what the sounds meant. What were the animals saying? They didn't seem like happy sounds, he thought, as he drifted off to sleep. Chapter 11. Sunrise. Through his sleeping bag, Dylan felt something gently squeezing his toes. He heard his mom's soft voice. "It's time to take our special walk and watch the moon fade away and the sun come up." Dylan remembered other times when they had seen the full white moon get smaller and smaller and then disappear into the west as the sun began to light up the eastern sky. Holding a large blueberry muffin, he quietly and slowly followed his mom down the trail toward the great marsh and the dunes. "You're pretty quiet this morning, Dylan. How was your night?" Dylan started to answer when his mom stopped abruptly and pointed to a buck and a doe bounding off into the thicket, their tails waving like small white flags of surrender. Suddenly, a large owl flew across the path between Dylan and his mom. She turned to see Dylan crouched next to a large oak tree. His shoulders were raised like he was trying to pull his head into his body. His hands covered his ears. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Weird. This is weird. Last night was weird." "I agree. This morning is as strange and wild as last night," she said as they watched two great blue herons take off from the meadow. Their low, squawking growl sounded angry, but Dylan recognized their call of danger. "Humans approaching, humans approaching." As they walked on together, they watched a pair of raccoons ramble away through the cordgrass. "Very weird. So much wildlife. Let's go over there," he said as he pointed toward a cluster of maple trees near the creek. "Let's do it," his mom responded as she moved ahead. She thought about Dylan's progress over the last year. Sudden changes in plans, unexpected noises, or a change in his routine had always been a challenge for him. He seemed to be handling them better. Chapter 12. Tracks. Near the creek, Dylan stopped abruptly and studied the ground. There were animal tracks everywhere. He began calling out the names of those he recognized. His mom joined in. Wild turkey, skunk, raccoon, rabbit, fox, duck, muskrat. "Wait," Dylan exclaimed. "These are coyote tracks. None of these animals would be here with a coyote." Crouching down and looking closely at the wet ground, his mom said, "Come, Dylan. I'm pretty sure these tracks are from a weasel. And these, they look like they're from an otter." Chapter 13. 1,000 Birds. As they moved further through the grove of trees, they were overwhelmed by an obnoxious odor. Dylan felt like he was going to vomit. He quickly brought his T-shirt up over his nose and turned away toward the bay. The ground, tree roots, and marsh grass were all trampled and covered with bird poop. The low branches were white with droppings. 1,000 birds, he said, coughing. 1,000 birds. Stumbling across tree roots, he quickly moved away and plunked down on a large log, worn smooth by years of high tides and wind. His mom came and stood next to him. She wanted to put her hand on his shoulder, But she learned that Dylan didn't like to be touched at times like this. "I have an idea. What do you say we go back and cook up some breakfast and talk about all of this?" Although he seemed deep in thought, Dylan jumped up quickly at the suggestion of breakfast. They headed back into the woods and up the trail towards their campsite. Chapter 14. Breakfast Memories. When they were back at their campsite, Dylan sat at the picnic table. He ran his fingers back and forth along the spaces between the pine boards of the table while his mom cooked bacon and pancakes. One of the best parts of camping for Dylan was the wonderful smell of cooked bacon and the taste of hot pancakes smothered in maple syrup. During the year, whenever his mom mentioned camping or said, "I think it's time for us to plan another camping trip," he would immediately imagine the sizzling strips of bacon in the black cast iron pan. He would remember lightly browned pancakes with bubbly edges stacked on a yellow plate and topped with crisp bacon, butter, and plenty of maple syrup. Dylan's uncle in Vermont sent pure maple syrup every Christmas. "Well, Dylan, I don't get it. Every kind of wild animal on Cape Cod must have been here in the moonlight last night. The tracks and the poop are from animals that fear one another, predators that would never hang out together. How could that be? I just don't get it." Dylan had the same questions. He pictured all the tracks and each animal. He clasped his hands to his chest as he recalled last night's fire, the bright moon, the screeching birds, and the strange animal sounds. He was glad his mom had remembered his headphones that blocked out the noise and allowed him to eventually get to sleep. Chapter 15. Lucky Rocks. After breakfast, Dylan's mom made peanut butter sandwiches for their lunch, his favorite. They filled their backpacks with food and water and started their hike to the beach. Along the way, they stopped for a break at the edge of the marsh. They sat on a huge square-sided timber from a very large vessel that had probably run aground in a storm. They had stopped here many times when hiking, and the large beam had never moved. It was deeply embedded into the shore. They watched the red-winged blackbirds sway in the tops of the marsh weeds. Dylan collected a handful of hollow baby crab shells from the marsh grass. The birds had cleaned the crabs of their meat. At the beach, Dylan's mom watched Dylan collecting stones. He would walk a few steps, then stop and study the stones at his feet, pick one up and study it more, and then keep it or toss it. He tried unsuccessfully to skip a stone on the water, as he and his mom had done before. When it didn't work, he became frustrated. He yelled, and he threw the stone into the woods. "You can do it," his mom said as she approached him, her eyes scanning the beach as he looked for a good skipping stone. "Remember, the best stones are the flat ones, and then you need to crouch low before you throw." "I don't know. Leave me alone," Dylan murmured. Dylan's mom knew that if she gave him his space, he would calm himself. He had learned how to calm himself down. Giving him space helped him. Chapter 16. The Second Night. On their second night, Dylan was restless. He lay awake asking himself the same question over and over and over. What could be so important or urgent that it would bring all the animals together, even some that were enemies? He remembered in detail the tracks of each animal. There was the smooth, clear, split hoof of the deer, the tiny front paws of the raccoon, whose print reminded him of his own hand when he was little, the webbed feet of the ducks, and a wild turkey's skinny footprint shaped like a ship's anchor. He also remembered it was only one more day before he would see Mr. Arnold, his favorite teacher. Chapter 17, Animal Talk. Mr. Arnold and some of Dylan's classmates listened to Dylan's strange story about the full moon night and the unusual gathering of the wild animals. He told them about all the tracks in the mud and the bird poop from 1,000 birds. Dylan's description of his wild moon night was so real that one student covered her ears when he told her about the birds' screeches and the animals' sounds that kept him awake. Someone said, "Maybe it happens at every full moon." No, it doesn't. We've camped there before in moonlight, and it's never happened," Dylan explained. Someone asked, "Can animals communicate with each other?" "My cat and dog do," said one of the girls. "They definitely understand one another." Mr. Arnold said, "Scientists have recorded dolphins communicating with each other, and whales too." Someone else said, "Parrots and crows can mimic people." Another said, "Elephants send and hear messages from one another through their feet, even miles apart." Another student, who hadn't really been paying attention, said, "Birds sing songs to one another when it's time to mate. And remember when we saw the movie Lady and the Tramp and how all the dogs in the neighborhood talk to each other?" Mr. Arnold got up from his chair and moved around the circle of students. He mentioned that he had recently read about how chickens talk and have names for one another, and even a name for the person who feeds them and collects their eggs. With a gentle laugh, he said, "I also read that prairie dogs have a unique way of communication with their colony that warns of a person coming, even how fast he's coming." "There's so much we're learning about how animals communicate with each other," he said as he stood behind Dylan. "I hope everyone appreciates how lucky we are to have Dylan, our animal expert, in our class." Dylan smiled as he looked at the floor, feeling a little embarrassed. He started to think about his strange night as he heard Mr. Arnold say, "Thank you, Dylan, for sharing your knowledge with us. We have each learned a lot from you, and we appreciate it." Dylan heard clapping as his mind drifted to more thoughts about his wild moon night. Chapter 18, Chesterton Saves the Bunnies. Later in the school library, Dylan found some picture books about a weasel named Chesterton. There was Chesterton Saves the Whale, Chesterton's Winter Rescue, Chesterton Keeps His Town Jumping. The one that got Dylan's attention was Chesterton Saves the Bunnies. As Dylan flipped through the pages, he thought, what kind of weasel would help a rabbit? Weasels usually hunt rabbits. Chesterton Saves the Bunnies was about a weasel who helped a family of cottontails find a new habitat as bulldozers were destroying their safe home in the briars by an abandoned farmhouse. When Dylan checked the book out of the library to share with his mom, he asked the librarian if there were weasels on Cape Cod. "Absolutely," she smiled. "I have one that lives under my garage. He often comes and peeks at me when I'm reading on my back porch." Chapter 19, That's It. At supper that night, Dylan read the story to his mom. He asked her if she was absolutely certain that she had seen weasel tracks in the mud by the creek. "I'm sure they were weasel tracks because of the shape of the 5 toes," she said. "That's it," Dylan exclaimed. "That's it. They're together. They're all together. The animals were together because they're losing their habitat. The same weasel that helped the bunnies. They had a gathering or something. Yes, I know. I'm sure." Before he went to bed, Dylan asked, "Can you give me a ride to school early tomorrow?" Dylan had an idea. He could not wait to talk to Mr. Arnold. Chapter 20. Dylan's idea gets wings. The next day, after Mr. Arnold and Dylan had a quick talk after gym class, Mr. Arnold said, "I think you have a great idea, Dylan. Would you like to share it with the class?" That afternoon, Dylan showed the book, Chesterton Saves the Bunnies, to his class, and he told them about the story. "We need to talk about wild animals," he said. "We all need to study them. We need to find out what's happening to them. Each year we have Mother's Day and Father's Day and Halloween and a bunch of holidays, but we need to have a day to celebrate and learn about wild animals. I think we should have a special day, a special holiday for wild animals. Our school could start Wild Animal Day." Dylan's eyes drifted toward the window and the trees on the hillside as his classmates clapped and shared their ideas. One student said, "We could make up games and have people come and talk about animals." Another student who lived across the street from Dylan spoke, "We could make signs telling people to be careful not to destroy the animal's habitat." And she was suddenly interrupted by Dylan, who had another thought about Wild Animal Day. She frowned and looked at Mr. Arnold. She also remembered when Mr. Arnold had explained Dylan's interruptions. She was suddenly interrupted by Dylan, who had another thought about Wild Animal Day. She frowned and looked at Mr. Arnold. She also remembered when Mr. Arnold had explained Dylan's interruptions, when he was excited. He's not being rude or difficult. She waited for Dylan to finish and said, "We need to tell people to respect the animals, their habitats, their places to nest, eat, and raise their young." "Well, Dylan has thought a lot about this," said Mr. Arnold. "What do you all think about his idea about a Wild Animal Day?" A close friend, who actually had a crush on Dylan, said, "I have an idea. October 4th is Dylan's birthday. Wild Animal Day could be on Dylan's birthday." Dylan looked at the floor. Happy but a little embarrassed, he twisted back and forth in his chair. "We need to tell everyone," he said. "Our parents and our teachers and our neighbors, people all over town, everyone." Part 3. The Connection. He felt special. Totally and utterly special. Chapter 21. Animal Dreams. That night, before he went to bed, Dylan asked his mom if she would drive him to the campsite after school the next day. "Yes," she said. "I can do that if you like." As Dylan slept, he dreamt about the individual animals, but the most memorable part of his dream was about a very unusual encounter with a weasel. Driving to the campsite, Dylan was restless and pulling at his shirt. And when they arrived, they sat together at the picnic table. He seemed much more relaxed and happy to be there. He hadn't told his mom about his dream or why he wanted to visit the campsite, but she was happy to see how comfortable and confident he seemed to be. They walked the trail together until they came to where all the animals had been. As they walked, Dylan stepped ahead of his mom. which was not something he normally did. At another time, Dylan may not have been willing to go on without his mom. This time was different. He seemed to want to lead. Chapter 22. A Special Meeting. At the edge of the marsh, Dylan stopped and studied the area. He picked a spot that seemed right, a large fallen log in a grove of birch trees. His mom watched from a distance and then slowly walked back to the campsite. Dylan sat and thought about the full moon night, all the birds, the wild noises, and all the tracks. In his mind, he pictured what each animal looked like and where it lived. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted when he sensed some movement behind him. For some reason, Dylan didn't feel startled or afraid. He didn't even turn around. He looked straight ahead toward the creek and Cape Cod Bay. Then, like in his dream, a weasel peered over the end of the log several feet from Dylan. Although Dylan's hand gently fingered his shirt, he remained calm. The two looked at each other. Neither showed any fear. It was often hard for Dylan to look directly at another person's eyes, but he was fine looking directly into the weasel's. Dylan spoke softly. "I read the story about you. You saved the bunnies." He hesitated and then said, "I know we all have to figure out how to live together. We humans need to think about how we live so you creatures can live safely too. I'm just a kid. I have a lot to learn. But I know we can figure this out. I promise to try." Although Dylan could feel himself getting a little restless, he calmed himself and said, "We named October 4th Wild Animal Day. It wasn't exactly my idea, but it's my birthday, so I won't forget it. It's a day for humans to get together and learn about wild animals." Dylan slowly stood. He looked at the weasel's dark eyes. Inside, he felt warm and comfortable. "We can do this," he exclaimed. "We can do this." Chapter 23. A Day to Remember. The weasel raised on its hind legs and studied Dylan. Dylan was certain that it understood what he'd said about Wild Animal Day and that his friends were serious about protecting wild animals. The weasel hopped off the log towards the woods, but stopped briefly. Standing on the trampled marsh grass, he looked back at Dylan and then bounded away as if he was late for supper or in a hurry to catch up with his animal friends. Dylan's heart was racing. He felt as wild as the weasel. He jumped up on the log and then off and then back on again. He laughed and he ran toward the trail. He had never felt so free and so happy. When he came to the big oak tree where the owl had frightened him and his mom, he started to hug it, but stopped quickly when he touched the rough bark. He giggled and he laughed and he ran as fast as he could up the trail toward his mom and their campsite. Dylan wasn't sure what had just happened, but he felt like he'd been given a special gift. He felt special. Totally, utterly special. Dylan thought about Mr. Arnold and his friends at school. Tomorrow they would start planning Wild Animal Day. He always loved thinking about his birthdays, but this year it would be amazing. Maybe the best birthday he would ever have.
The day we met upon the trail, you stopped and smiled at me. You tucked your tongue and turned to run, and stopped again to see. You wanna play, you said to me, and danced upon your heels. Then you twirled and sang, and from you rang a most inviting squeal. Chesterton, where have you been? Your eyes have such a sheen. Been saving threatened cottontails from foxes and machines. You're such a different weasel, so daring and people kind. Your chatter and your tuck, tuck, tuck are etched upon my mind.